Now live. All right, mic sounding good. I'm going to do 2 earphones today. So I'm seeing a lot of what's up, Big Malone? This thing throw my name up there or something? Give an alert? Maybe he's not in here. Somebody's in here. I don't know. Frank, what's up, my guy? What's good in Canada? John, what's up, man? Good to see you, my friend. I've been traveling back and forth to Georgia a little bit, helping my dad out, and working on the truck some. About to do a new truck review. Yeah, Frank, I see you've been catching some fish, man. You guys call them sunnies up there like they do in Minnesota? Oops. Earpiece malfunctions. Oh, that's cool, man. It shows it like before I didn't realize it showed it before I even went on. I was just like messing with it earlier, trying to figure out how to stream. Mike, what's up? Dex, what's up? A lot of streams going on Monday nights, man. All right. I won't do Mondays then. Usually I do Sundays, but I was busy yesterday. Appreciate you coming in, Dexter. Appreciate all the memberships too, man. Oh, good for you, Frank. Frank had actually identified the fish that he catches. I was up in Minnesota fishing once, and everything they caught was a sunfish. They called a sunny. Thought it was pretty funny. Tuesdays are bad too? All right. No problem. I had to figure out a good time slot. But no, I was noticing the past couple weeks, man, that there are a lot of guys doing research, and there are a lot of guys doing content that looks familiar, and that's cool, man. I'm glad to see it, really. Sometimes when it's verbatim and you don't get any credit, that's one thing, but that's okay too, because at least they're, the truth's getting out there and not so much nonsense. And you know why they're doing it too, because they're seeing the confrontation. The confrontation drives the algorithms on all the platforms pretty much. So they get the back and forth going, they get engagement going, they get more followers, they get more eyes on them. But like I said, at least they are using factual information to do that. Did you guys see the poker chip video that I did a little earlier? I like that. I'm going to use that a few times. It's a good visual. I don't know what made me think of it. I saw him I was at Walmart and was walking around. I saw they were like $10, just for some chips. So I thought it just kind of occurred to me that you could use them as a carrying capacity. And that's what I will start there. And if you guys have any questions, fire them. But in an original pond, like a brand new pond, when you stock it, when you throw the bluegill in there and let them go for a year, they'll just fill the pond. They'll eat the zooplankton, and the aquatic insects will, show up. And actually, I don't even know how phytoplankton is transported around. I asked that question in school, and nobody could give you an answer on that, how plankton is transported into a new body of water. Of course, at Sugar Hill, there's a stream coming in from another pond, so it would flow in, just downstream. But even in a pond that's filled just off pure watershed, you don't have to have a stream to fill a pond. You can, if it's built right, and in the right spot, it's just the groundwater, what's called groundwater flow. If you think about like kind of like pouring water onto a big sponge, eventually it'll seep out the bottom, and the ground works the same way, and the water will work its way in. But that's all engineering stuff. It's punching above my weight. I've just seen guys kind of go like the guys who don't hire engineers. Sometimes their ponds don't fill up. Or on the flip side of that coin, they could have built a pond that was much bigger, so they have a ton of water flow, and you can't use fertilizer to boost the plankton bloom. So you can significantly change the carrying capacity of the ponds in Georgia, and that's what we've done with the feeder, and adding some phosphorus and nitrogen. Brought it up to be probably a more productive pond. We haven't raised the productivity of the pond to an unnatural level. We've just raised it from a low productivity pond, which is normal for Georgia, to a high productivity pond, which would be normal maybe in some other part of the country that's got a little bit better water quality, a little more limestone, a little more nutrients coming in. So am I artificially, increasing the carrying capacity of the pond? Yes, I am. Am I increasing it on like aquaculture levels of like thousands of pounds of fish per acre? No, I'm not. I'm keeping it in what would be considered a natural range for a different area of the country. And if you pump, you could cut the feeder on 10 times a day and grow, 1,000 pounds of fish per acre. We were probably sitting at 300 or 350, something like that. But when you do that, cut this thing off. Aquaculture ponds are not designed to hold fish long term. So any type of, catfish production, tilapia production, anything like that, they grow the fish out quickly, harvest them for food, and drain the pond and restart that process. Certainly aquaculture ponds have all kinds of problems with the diseases and death, and it's a whole other form of managing, fish, that I really can't speak on it. I've never worked at a fish hatchery, but I know they grow them at much higher densities than what we're growing, Sugar Hill. Like I said, we're keeping it in a natural but higher range. Let's see what Big Malone's got for us here. Got a farm pond. He fishes. Dam busted. Yep, that happens. Yep, you should do that. Oh, and they didn't do it. Yeah, that sounds about right. Yes, Big Malone, they should have done that. So what happens, like say, we'll just use our example pond, Sugar Hill. I stocked that 2.5 acre pond for about $1,500. And you don't have to put any more money in it than that. You can buy the fish very small, since there's no bass in there. And we put them in there, let the bluegill go. If you look at the textbook, if you pull up how to stock a pond, online or whatever, it'll tell you to stock 500 bluegill per acre in the fall, and then follow up the next spring with largemouth bass. I found some workarounds if you're not on that schedule, but that being said, letting it go an entire year, if you drain the pond down in, May the year before, which is kind of what happened at Sugar Hill. It was May, June, and bass are usually available at the fish hatchery in late May, early June, most of the time, around in Georgia anyway. So that pond went an entire year with just bluegill being fed and growing in there. So we added the bass at a little bit bigger size because we had to, because of the tagging process that I did, so I could differentiate between the Floridas and the Northerns. We had the Northerns pit tagged, and I really like, for maximum, like if you want me to grow you the biggest bass possible, I've grown these, not Sugar Hill at all. They're growing very well. We got like like a 3 pound average right now, and just a little over 2 years. So can't complain. But I have seen F1 bass go to 2.5 pounds in 11 months, to give you an idea of how much significantly faster an F1 hybrid bass can grow. And actually, F1 hybrid used to be a misnomer, but it's not anymore, because they've differentiated Floridas and Northerns as different species. So technically, an F1 is a hybrid fish. Although I think true hybrids don't reproduce, and F1 bass definitely reproduce. So our efforts at Sugar Hill are to get the northern bass, pure northerns, and Florida bass to spawn, year after year, and hopefully create F1s year after year. Because once you stock F1s, like the first year, the F2 generation doesn't exhibit that hybrid vigor type growth. So, we kind of had that opportunity with the way everything went with the pond, and that's the way we went with it, which is really cool, because although I could like be showing off and saying, "Ooh, look how fast this F1 bass grew," I've done that a bunch of times where this project is brand new. Like, I really don't know what's going to happen, so I've never done it before. So that's interesting and cool. It keeps me more interested in it anyway, because, like I said, I've done it so many times that it's just it's kind of boring after a while if you do it right. But going with what Big Malone is talking about, what those guys did by not letting the pond drain all the way, they left fish in there. So it depends on the species of fish they left and the size of fish they left. If you left one largemouth bass in there, when you try to restock it, it will absolutely hammer everything in there. It is critically important that you get all the bass out. And especially if they had crappie in there, it would have been a great opportunity just to get rid of the crappie population and not have to worry about that and get much better bass growth. But usually guys just they've never watched this process. They've never seen a good lake. I had a kid come on Facebook, again, using the similar, I've got a good pond with crappie in it, I catch an 8-pound bass out of it every season. Okay, so I can't remember how big he said the pond was. I think he said 7 or 8 acres, but might be wrong on that. Anyway, his justification for a good fishery was he catches an 8-pound fish every year. It's like, okay, but how long is the fish, right? Is it a 27-inch 8-pound bass? Because that's a fish in terrible condition. Is it a 23-inch 8-pound bass? I guarantee it's not a crappie in the pond. You never see that. In this situation, if the pond was brand new and they stocked crappie in there, the first 4 or 5 years, all the fish will look good. It'll all look healthy. They'll all grow to pretty good sizes, crappie included. It's the long term that they don't know about. So, using his example of I catch an 8-pounder out of my, let's just say, 7-acre pond every season, on years 4, 5, 6, like that, in 7 to 8-acre ponds, I've seen guys catch 40, 50, 60, 8-pound bass per season. So when I say the kid hasn't seen a good pond, he really hasn't seen a good pond. Like, I'm talking about, you catch an 8-pound fish in a good pond every single time you go during that 3-4 year window, right? And usually you can extend that window. I've had a couple clients, where that window that will stay good, but most of the time, but just like, Big Malone just tried to tell the dude, man, do it this way. It's gonna be cheaper. The fish are gonna grow better. They don't do that. And they do the same thing to me years 4, 5, 6. It's like, if you want this pond to continue producing like this, you need to be harvesting these 1 pound fish. Your 1 pounders are getting light, you're getting crowded with fish. You need to harvest some, and they never do, and they stunt their fishery out. I've had guys, against my advice, stock crappie and just ruin the pond. It gets to be out, 6, 7, 8 years, and it's not fishing the way that it should be fishing, or the way that it was fishing. And they start asking me questions. They kind of start pointing the fingers at me. It becomes my fault. And I have to go back to the beginning, where it clearly says, on the contract, don't stock anything that I don't recommend. And crappie would be listed right there. And it said, when you did that, you messed everything up. And they don't want to believe that. They want to live in the land of Facebook groups where, I don't know, Disney princesses come and fix everything. I don't know where those guys. I don't understand their observation skills over there. But again, I think I'm coming from a place too where literally none of those guys have seen a good pond. They've never seen a good 10-acre pond, a good 20-acre pond. Good 20-acre, 30-acre ponds are really the perfect size. If I had lotto money, that's probably the place I would be. 20, 30, maybe up to 50 acres. Once you get past that, if things start getting out of whack, you can't. If I had a lottery, I could have a shotgun boat, but still, the amount of work for 50 acres to harvest enough fish out to make a difference once it does start to go a little crowded, is so tremendous. It's just a brutal amount of work. I had another kid on, Instagram saying that they had an 80-acre lake that they had started harvesting and had gotten good results. And I was like, my God almighty, you guys have been working hard. And then the second part of that comment was, yeah, it's been a lot of electrofishing. It's like, I would say 80 acres is probably impossible to harvest enough fish with fishermen. That's about the breaking point where you're not going to get enough guys catching enough fish to make any difference to change it. What's John got going for us here? The county had a 12 million gallon sewage spill. Yeah, that'll pump up the plankton bloom zone. It won't be good for the pond, though, in the long run. What happens is what'll probably happen, John, is it'll create blue-green algae blooms. It'll get real nasty real quick. It'll smell. It'll be too much for nutrients. So the phytoplankton bloom will get too dense. It'll have less than 12 inches of visibility due to green plankton, not muddy water. Although less than 12 inches of visibility from anything is terrible for the pond, terrible for the plankton bloom, therefore terrible for the fish. But it will explode with plankton, and then it will naturally cycle itself out. It will, just like if you put too much fertilizer on a field or whatever, kind of burn it up, but it will cycle itself out eventually. But it's bad because it brings the plankton density up real high, which will bring the fish population up real high, but then it will cycle itself out and return back to a normal level. And it'll leave, like 3 to 4 times as many fish if it takes it a couple seasons to cycle, and the plankton bloom stays dense, and then it falls out and goes away. You'll have 300 pounds of fish per acre go back down to 100 pounds of fish per acre. And then generally you end up with those long snake bass that are just terrible looking. Big Malone's got it was slightly over an acre, 1, 2, okay. Oh yeah. On you talking about Google Earth? Yeah, that's a handy little thing, little tool to have. Little that and a topographic map where you can see the ledges. Always use both of those things quite a lot. Yeah, see, it's you know, that sounds like it probably has crappie in it. When a 21.5 inch bass should be able to eat anything in a pond. So if it's remotely close to balance, they'll usually be pretty good weight. Let's pull our card. Yeah, it's at 5.3 out here at 21. So when you're barely 4 pounds, you're 1.3 pounds under standard weight. And that's not spawning stress. That's starvation. That's or a misbalance that's creating a really skinny fish of some kind. That's a problem. It's just a red flag waving. And once you see, once you understand this stuff and see it, and if any of you guys, Dexter, if you want stickers, I'll send them to you. All members are getting this stuff for free. I've taken the stickers down for sale. It's actually costing, I'm losing money on it. I'm not selling enough of them to keep the shop open. The monthly bill, the sales of the sticker doesn't even cover the monthly cost of the website to host it, So I pulled that down, and there is a new shop. If you guys care to have any aquatic biologist shirts and stuff, I got Yin to get that going on YouTube. So there is a drop shipping store attached to the YouTube page. You can get t-shirts, hats. I ordered a sticker just to see. It was the disappointing part was I ordered the $10 sticker and I got a $4.80 shipping charge, which it's like, come on, man, you can put a sticker in an envelope, $4.80 for the shipping. I don't know if that's like like a standard, like low rate shipping thing that they have with this company or what, but the shipping charges, they might be making extra money on that as well. But the nice thing about it is it's a little more money than normal, but at the same time, I don't even have to touch it. It's just drop shift. You guys order it and it goes straight from them, and I don't have to touch it, which is nice because I don't want to have to go to the post office anymore. Especially here, I live probably 18 miles to the post office. So it's a 40-mile round trip. I'm burning fuel to make a couple bucks on a sticker that I'm losing money on anyway. So I just didn't see the point. But any of you member guys or longtime followers, if you need stickers, throw me a DM with your mail and address and I'll shoot you to. There's no big deal. Yeah, woke science, Dexter said. That's pretty funny. Yeah, catch and release. When you look at it fundamentally, the original woke people walking around the United States came from the 80s, are bass fishermen. That is as woke as you can be, catch and release bass fishermen. I don't like to bring politics into this at all, but it really is true. That's just ridiculous, like outlandish nonsense that it'd be like telling deer hunters don't shoot deer, It's got 260 acre lake, flows into Altoona. Yeah. Yeah, the scum line. I might want to wear gloves when you wash the old yak, my friend. Sure, Dexter, man. I appreciate you too, man. All the memberships you hand out was way too kind, man. Appreciate that a lot. All right, Big Malone's got trying to catch them out. Yeah, good luck with that. You'll never get all the fish out of a pond. You'll never you can, let's put it this way. If you had a 1 acre pond, 1 to say probably 5, and you just kept every single bass that you ever caught, you could bring it down to a level that would swing it towards you've harvested too many, maybe even up to 10 acres, depending on, how much you fish. If you fished every single day, you could definitely disrupt, you could bring a bass population down too low in a 10-acre pond through harvesting. But once you get into that like 20, 30 acre type pond area, or you have multiple ponds that you're fishing in, and I've seen this before. I actually made a comment in the thread feed on Instagram. One of those posts with the bass in the cooler has gone pretty much viral on there. And one of the guys, like, who keeps bass? Like, oh my God, the world has ended. And actually, it gave me a thought that I hadn't like kind of put it together. And it was the people, because I've done this for so long, over so many years, that the people that did keep the bass, right, that were like old school, if it hits the hook, it's going in the cooler. That's the way it used to be. People don't shoot deer and leave them in the woods. They take them and get them processed and eat the meat, and that's the way fishing used to be too. Like, that's going to the house. It's not going back into the pond. And the people that I know did that in ponds, and let's just define ponds as, anything less than about 40 acres. They also were the people that caught fish consistently over 10 pounds, 10 to 12 pound bass, right? Every single group. And from that, some were in South Georgia, some were in Alabama, a couple families out in Mississippi, Louisiana, places like that, rural places, old farmer type, old school types, where it ain't going back. It's going in the cooler, it's going to the house. It's feeding the family, big farming type families with large families. That was not released. And I don't know, that guy's statement just reminded me of that fact that, like, wow, because usually those farmer types had more than one pond too. They weren't just hammering a 5-acre pond consistently. They'd fish the 5-acre, the 10-acre, the 15-acre, whatever they had, but they did it in a way that, and they didn't necessarily know, or we can keep this many fish per acre or anything like that. They weren't even kind of that way. They just had enough ponds around that they didn't really overfish any of them. And again, 12, 11, 12, 13 pound bass, those are the only groups of people that I know who caught fish that size, were the ones that harvested. Let's see. Frank's guy says, Wham Baits is drop shipping merch. Oh yeah, man, I never even thought about that. Merch from like customs and stuff like that, right? I bet that is Oh, you catching crappie out of there? Oh, man, they should have drained that thing. It'll be screwed up. That's unfortunate. That's a great opportunity lost to have grown some awesome bass in a 1-acre pond. You don't want crappie in ponds that small at all. Actually, I don't want crappie in ponds, period. I've seen them messing like 50, 100-acre lakes where they're just in bad condition. And it's usually about this big. And when you do clean them, there's like no meat in them. They're just kind of useless fish that you can't really eat them. When you fry them, they're all just bread. There's really just not much meat to them. And they're all the same size. They're all the same. They'll have enlarged eyes. I know we've touched on that a few times, but crappie will get the enlarged eye when they've been stunted for a long period of time. Their eyes and their head, kind of like bass do too, though, but it's a little bit noticeable. Sorry. It's a little more noticeable on the panfish. Their eyes will get enlarged. And Yeah, that's unfortunate that they didn't. Yeah, my man Alex, he says he's so sick of the crappie. I hear you, dude. Uh, it gives you a job. Alex has got a 2.5 acre pond in Georgia as well. I've been working with him. How's your feeder been working, man? Clint's had a few troubles with his. These are the customer service has been pretty good, but it hadn't been consistent. So I've been I put a little more fertilizer in there, boost the plankton bloom up, and go back to the way I was doing it before. When we started getting inconsistent feeding, and that we saw that gap in the 3 to 4 inch fish in the shotgun survey. It shows up almost immediately, and that's where that comes from, is the inconsistency in the feed. So that worried me a bit about Sugar Hill. But again, like, it's the first 5 years, it'll be cool. It's for you. Once you get it started right, it's kind of hard to screw it up. How we do between years 5 and 10 will depend on how consistent we've been the first 5 years, really. But we'll have good fish in there. It won't be any trouble. And Alex's pond is really got some nice fish in it. He's got bass, that are big fish, but they're like in the 85% relative weight. And that's normally what you see with the crappie. Like, when your bass are pretty consistently in the 80s, but they're bigger, that's an indicator of crappie. A pretty solid indicator of crappie too. Just a pattern I've noticed in the data. I don't think you would know that unless you'd done a heck of a lot of fishing and measuring. That's another thing too that kind of makes me laugh. These guys, another guy came on and was talking about, that's not a 5-pounder, that's a 4-pounder. And it's like, man, do you think that, like, we're not professionals using like advanced technology and scales and weighing the fish exactly? I mean, really? Like, you think that it kind of blows me away, the statement some of these dudes make. I couldn't imagine going to anybody else's job and talking to them the way that some people address me, as a professional. It's like, come on, dude, like, be serious. But I hear you, Alex. Back to that point, when you have crappie in a pond, you on the days the crappie are biting, if you can get them to bite, no matter what you wanted to go fish for, you are kind of obligated to be harvesting fish because you're not going to catch them every time you go. So if you get out there and they're biting, okay, well, now you're harvesting crappie out of the pond, and you're generally harvesting a bunch of crappie out of the pond. So then that's putting even more work on you, because now you got a bunch of fish that you really weren't planning on cleaning. Now you've got a whole cooler full of fish you got to clean. And, and you can't, sometimes you can't even keep enough crappie to matter. Now, on your 2.5 acre system with the forward facing sonar and all those kinds of deals, maybe we can stay ahead of it and keep them from completely screwing us up. Also, too, we watch reproduction. Alex Flippin' Kicks has been doing a good job, and interesting too. Been real consistent with raking the edges. He's got a lot of pine trees around the edge of the pond, and a lot of just thick, heavy, what we'll call detritus, rotting organic material in the bottom. And he's been going in there with a rake and pulling that out and exposing the gravel and exposing the sandy and gravelly kind of bottom around the edges where he can. And man, the fish just instantly went in there and made beds on all that, which was cool. I've never kind of really fooled with any of that, but that's certainly good to see the game fish with, better spawning habitat, and learn something new there. It's like, if somebody has a pond that's completely surrounded by trees, it's a real good idea to rake out, just get that junk out of there and expose that pond bottom. And if you can't rake it out, I'd probably go the other way and maybe just sink some pea gravel on like trash can lids, something like that. So you've got gravel suspended above the muck, good spawning habitat. Now, I have done that a few times where we would build a trough or, just fabricate I've used old tires with plastic before. Don't really like using tires, but they were already in the bottom of the pond, so I don't know. One thing you got to be careful about tires is too that it creates a place that catfish really like to spawn. And I've had a few ponds that where tires were used, and then the catfish reproduction was balling out of control, which is usually not normal. Like usually the bass will eat up channel catfish like candy. But I've seen it a few times where when the habitat's really good, the channel cats really cause problems because they get on the feed, they grow fast, and then once they get big from the feeder, they start competing with bass. But I hear you on sick of the crappie, man. They just put a whole new level of work on you, and it's always there. It never goes away. They reproduce very well, usually. And every year you'll be doing the same things over and over again. And generally on the days you really don't feel like doing it is the days they're going to be biting. You're going to, like I said, you're going to be harvesting fish. You're going to be cleaning fish. You're going to have a cooler full of fish you got to get rid of somewhere. That is unnecessary. Like if they weren't there, you'd be having better bass fishing, better bluegill fishing, and not all that unnecessary work. Turn the mute off. Yeah. Yeah, man. It's the newbies, you know. They've never seen the content, and they've never fished or managed in, you know, good fisheries before. So they're just way off base. But I don't know. Sometimes I kind of enjoy messing with them, to be honest. Again, it drives the algorithm, you know. If you look at the numbers, like I don't know, like my most popular one on YouTube right now is at like almost 1.2 million, and you know, probably like 37,000 likes out of that many views, you know. So there's not even when you consider how many people even touch like compared to the number of people who actually viewed it, it's almost insignificant. You know, 36,000 likes on 1.2 million views. That's strange, right? Because, you know, like I can see like in the metrics that they watch most of the video, you know. So they don't even click like most of the time. And then when you break down, there was like 950 comments. So you break that down even further, out of that 950 comments, probably like half of them, maybe 40% of them were positive comments. So 60% probably at most would be negative comments out of 900. So, you know, like 600 people out of 1.2 million had something negative to say. Yeah, they're insignificant, you know. It's mathematically, it's kind of like, you know, trying to catch the 1-pounders out of a 1,000-acre reservoir. Whatever efforts you and your buddies put in are insignificant, and their comments are insignificant. Although, like I said, the response, I think they tend to respond back with more word salad than they originally came with. And I think that the AI, the algorithm or whatever, sees that engagement and puts it towards more people. And I also think that there are a lot of people who snoop and read through those comments. So that too keeps eyes on the page. I don't know, just any information you guys, you know, I'm just giving it out there, putting out there my kind of strategy towards that. I don't take any of that stuff personally, really. It can be aggravating, but you know, at the end of the day, they're just driving the system and you're not going to have a popular post without some negativity. So just be prepared for it and use it to your advantage. And I'm with you on that, Frank, man. My sleep patterns are jacked up. But anyways, yeah, they were definitely stirred up on a few of those, but the collaboration thing too, where it's like you can tag someone now on Instagram or you can collab with them. And if you hit the collab button, that puts your post on their page as well. So when dudes like Alex Rudd and Oliver Nye and Tackle Talk and people with much higher follower counts than I have, collab with me on stuff like that. I'll invite them. They don't collab on every single one of them, and I don't blame them because it's just a bunch of nonsense usually. But Alex and Oliver usually do most of the time, so it puts more eyes on what's going on. Are you guys noticing that though? Like I've noticed a lot of guides and just followers. Like I've been tagged a lot of times on guys, breaking down the food chain, breaking down. Uh, it just sounded like a biological page, and I'm proud to see it, man. I'm glad to see it, and I hope it works for them. I hope they get a lot of views and follows, and yeah, Dexter, I agree, man. Like you you're not going to put anything on there like people are going to find something to complain about. It's amazing. It's really strange. It makes me wonder, like, I'm generally a happy person most of the time and always have been. My mom always said that about me. She said, "You were the happiest kid. You never had a bad day." Um, I wonder if the people, there's many of these people are the opposite, where every day is a bad day for them. And the more people they can drag into their bad day, the better they feel about themselves. But I've owned some guys so hard on there. Like if it was me, I would like delete that off from public record. Like I wouldn't want that. Wouldn't want people reading that. But anyway. Oh, that's interesting. Clear Lake. Some dude said that it might have been you, Dexter. I don't even know, man. It's kind of getting hard to keep up with everybody. Well, except for the 9 or 10 of us that are consistently here. But um, yeah, I heard about Clear Lake having a die off, which is interesting because I wonder what's causing the die offs. I have no idea. I'll have to talk to Oliver about that. But also notice that isn't Clear Lake like really well known for large numbers of big fish? Like it really produces a lot of nice fish, doesn't it? Does it not? And it also, so it's Mother Nature doing the harvesting for us, I guess is what I'm getting at. People go into the panic attacks about the dead fish everywhere, and it must be chemicals or aliens or sewer treatment or sewage or God knows what. I don't, just insert any idiotic idea about why the fish are dying here. But yeah, check me if I'm wrong, but Clear Lake cranks out some tanks. And I would say those seasonal die-offs are beneficial more than they're negative. They're doing the job, especially on a lake that big. I think is a huge place. So if you're getting seasonal die-offs, it's kind of keeping those small. I'm sure it's killing big fish too, but when you remove a 5-6 pounder, it's not the end of the world because it's alleviated some pressure, and it's also a bigger lake, like we talked about. So it's really hard to impact a fish kill. just won't impact it that much, really. Y'all are all bots, figures. Josh says fishing's picking up. That's good. Yeah, man. I would imagine that's gonna, Clear Lake's gonna be well, that's a science project unto itself. I wonder, is it a planktonic thing? Is it an oxygen deal that kills them, Dexter? Do you know? Why they die? Does anybody with any intelligence say why they are kicking, or turnovers, or oxygen depletion? That's interesting that it's kind of rare to see fish kills in such a big lake, but I don't know. Yeah, I thought that was right, Josh. 21 pounders caught out there. So there's an indication right there, right? Like we are automatically know when bass start getting, that big, we are dealing with an extremely low bass population. Like they're having some significant death, and it's easy for the forage base to recover. Especially the bluegill type base, any kind of shad or herring. Usually, your multiple, like thread fins, are multiple spawners. Bluegill are multiple spawners. So anything that survives and gets straightened back out begins spawning immediately and pumps that thing full of fish. And since the predators died out, you got to wait until the next season before they come in. So it kind of bumps the system towards trophy bass, and you'd be seeing the same thing in is it pronounced Biwa in Japan, like Biwa, Biwi, I think, Biwa, or Biwa. I don't know. Anyway, that's where that kid caught that 22 pounder. And in Japan, at least 10 years ago, whenever he caught that thing, there were invasive species there. So they had gill netting programs. I've talked to a guy in Japan to confirm that. You weren't supposed to throw any bass back that you caught. So that brought the bass population way down, which drove the forage population way up. Bass in fewer numbers equal bigger bass. So if you're catching 21 pounders, you automatically know that you're dealing with a low bass population, and also too, you have in those bigger lakes, like I use the numbers from ponds, and where ponds are usually like bass are the number one predator. But up north where you've got pike, or out in California, or even like striper, if it's got any kind of ocean run stripers, or it's got flathead catfish or blue catfish, the list, crappie, yellow perch, any sort of predatory fish fills that niche of predator. You know, it's not just a largemouth bass. So in a larger system, you have to account for that as well. Like out here, we've got tons of mudfish or bowfin. Um, they're going to be directly competing with the bass. So all the fish that I caught out of Rodman are right at 100% relative weight, a little higher, but I don't think I've caught maybe one or two that were like 99% relative weight. The bass are nice and healthy, but there's also other predators out there. Hell, I'm sure there's bull sharks out there, you know. From time to time, people have talked about seeing dolphins out there come down the barge canal down out of St. John's. So it's a unique place that, bass are not. There's also 50 and 60-pound blue catfish caught out there. I don't know if there's any flatheads in there. I heard that one, but nevertheless, there's certainly some additional types of large predators there that change the dynamics, So instead of there being like 40 bass per acre out there, there's probably like 20, 25, maybe 30, because you have to account for the other predators cutting into what the bass have to eat. So we automatically know if there's other, in a big diverse fishery like that, if there's other predators, um, it's not going to be a 40 bass per acre rate like in our ponds where we only have bass as predators. It's going to have to be lower than that. It's heat and oxygen depletion. Oh, they spread the grass out there. I wouldn't think those guys would be. Again, I don't. You can definitely like in a pond, you can kill a pond spraying grass and getting die offs. Anything rotting in the water will the bacteria that makes the rotting process is oxygen consuming. So you could have low DO due to that. But you also have to consider if you let those weeds grow, those weeds will use oxygen at night and also cause an oxygen kill. So if they're doing spraying, trying to control the grass, I really, on a lake that size, I really wouldn't attribute it probably to the spraying as much as to the overgrowth of grass that are causing the BOD, which is biological oxygen demand. The weeds have gotten to the point where they're out of control, and it's the actual live plants that are causing the oxygen depletion, not the dead ones, probably, because that's why they're spraying it. They're trying to keep the biomass down to a point where you don't get BOD kills. BOD kills are really common in ponds. Not so common. I would have expected that lake. Is that lake shallow? I would have expected it to be deep, but usually lakes that have weed problems like that are shallow. Biwa, yeah. Yes, Dexter. That is exactly why they grow tanks in there. I am not sure that Japan might not be killing fish anymore. I've had mixed reviews on that one. They might not be. Hey, what's up, Chris? Man, thanks for joining. Appreciate you coming in. Yeah, it all makes sense, dude. It's all measured. It's all science. Um, if you can just get people to listen and learn and a little bit and watch and deprogram. And I can't hold it against them because I was the same way. When I was 20, I went to college at Valdosta State for a few years, and then I transferred to Georgia to major in fisheries. And I had been a fisherman up until that point since, the late 70s, 78, 79. My dad first started taking me. And so that whole 13 years of fishing made me an expert in everything aquatic, like all these guys on the internet, from your perspective, from my perspective, it was something I had been doing my whole life, and I was 20 and I had been alive a long time. But at least I had enough common sense to know, like when I got to Georgia, that holy cow, like these boys are levels above me, and within minutes of being there, you know what I mean? It wasn't, I went in there with the attitude of, I have an advantage from being a fisherman and going and majoring in fisheries. I did not. Not even close. There was none of this information. None of this information is available now on, most places. So especially back then, 1993, no, man, they were preaching catch and release, and that was all and what was going on. And what happened for me was I had a couple ponds in the area around where I grew up. It was a rural, dirt road kind of living. And the people were kind enough that did own the ponds to let us, me and my kid sister, and a few of the neighbor kids fish too. But there just weren't very many kids around, 4 or 5 of us. And, but they were cool. They were like, yeah, you guys can fish. We asked permission, of course. We never snuck or did anything wrong. But, nowadays you don't see people nearly as kind as they were back then. But they did let us fish. But what was unique about it is I kind of had what was me fishing for me every day as a boy turned into data in my head just like that as soon as I learned these principles at Georgia. Because I was like, oh yeah, that pond was bass heavy, and that pond we never caught anything in, had crappie in it. Because in the springtime we could catch crappie like crazy, but then we never caught anything else hardly the rest of the year. It was a waste of time going there, but any time in the spring. And then the back pond where the doctor owned, he had a feeder on it, and it was stupid good, you know. So I had this little mix of ponds that really just, you know, became field experience for me. And then to compound that onto turning, you know, taking that idea and turning it into a business and doing it for a living for so long. A lot of this fishery stuff that I did, I wasn't paid for on the HOA lakes. They would just cross out the fisheries portion of it. They wouldn't pay for it. You know, we're not, unless the fish were dead and floating, they didn't care. It's very strange, but in metro areas, most people who live on lakes don't fish. You would think it'd be opposite. You know, you'd think all the fishermen would be there, but it wasn't that way around the Atlanta area anyway. Very few fishermen, very few people cared, and that was just line itemed right off. So on the pond, again, I know because I had a shock boat and I had all those ponds that were my responsibility. And to me, that was really the only interesting part of the job. You had garbage removal, you had algae and plant control, dam inspections, sediment inspections. None of that's any fun. The only fun part of the day was jacking around with fish populations. So I usually just ended up doing my own kind of research, so to speak, for lack of a better term. Catching fish, it's like, all right, this one's full of bass, let's keep some out of it and see what happens. And there was enough small ones that I could make a difference. I had some big ones too, you know, 90, 100, 150 acre lakes that I managed for a long time. They were stunted out with bass, and I couldn't electrofish. I had a 90 acre lake called Berkeley Lake. I managed it for 10 or 12 years. It was so bass heavy. Like the only thing that came up in the shocking survey was bass, hundreds and hundreds of pounds of them. And I worked out a deal one time with a local fish delivery guy. All he did was deliver fish for people. And I was like, man, I'm going to have to, they've hired me to try to correct this situation. And I'm going to either have to bury these bass or sell them. And he's like, well, how big are they? And I'm like, anywhere from like 1 to 3 pounds. I'm pulling. And he's like, well, I've got all these people who want to buy fish. Let's just sell them. So I knew that the people who were buying the fish probably didn't eat them. They were just like these other people, like, oh, I'm just going to throw fish in there, you know? But at the same time, it was so many fish. It was so much money. We're getting like $10 a pound, you know, $10 for a 1 pound bass. So I made a killing. I mean, an absolute killing from trying to harvest that 90 acre lake. And since I was making so much money, I was going a lot. But the moral of that story is, not even with an electrofishing boat did I change anything about Berkeley Lake in the years that I worked there. The fish stayed skinny. They stayed stunted. I did stock some thread fins in. I finally got them to try to add some diversity to the forage base, see if it helped. But it was about that time that I got bought out, so I really didn't get to see the results of those efforts. And I don't know who took the management of that over. So it just kind of fell off my radar. And I'm sure it probably stayed bass heavy. I doubt anybody got enough fish out of it to make any difference at all. Yeah, Santee Cooper. Josh is talking about Santee Cooper. Santee Cooper is an interesting place. That's where they figured out that striper can live in fresh water all the time. When they impounded it, I think in the 30s or 40s. Not really. That's going back into some years there, but whenever they impounded Santee Cooper, 1938, I'll just say that. They impounded the dam and let it fill up. But when they did it in the springtime, early summertime, and the striper had run in from the coast and run up into the lake. So when they impounded the dam permanently, they trapped them. And it was 3-4 years later, it wasn't an immediate thing that they realized, because then they stocked the lake and everything. But then people started catching striper like years after the lake had been impounded. And they figured out, okay, well, the striper can come in and the striper go back out of the ocean. But when landlocked, they can survive. So that literally started like the big reservoir. It clued scientists in that they could breed striper, create a striper fishery, and use the striper to control shad populations out in big open water where largemouth bass really aren't very effective. It is just like not even freaking fair for blueback herring, gizzard shad, threadfin shad against striper. It's just striper speed merchants, man. They're ocean predators. So there's just they just crush. But I got to know the dudes at Lake Lanier, because that's a big striper fishery in Georgia. Pretty good too. Those dudes grow out and stock 1 million striper a year. And they stock them like this, like fry. They're little bitty guys. And I believe Lanier's like 28,000 acres, 25,000, 28,000, something like that. So 1 million striper fry go into that lake annually to get 5,000 to survive to adults, to give you an idea of, the other predators, the crappie and the whatever else, bass, what it spots. There's, spotted bass or Alabama bass, whatever you want to call them in there. They're just crushing them. The state's throwing in literally 1 million fish to get 5,000 to survive. And they've just figured that out. And it's cheaper to do it that way. It's cheaper to because it's so expensive to grow predatory fish to get them to a bigger size. Yes, if you grew them out to a bigger size, you get better survival. But at the same time, the cost is tremendous to grow predators. And it's just easier to throw the small ones in and say, hey, good luck. Do an episode on Clear Lake. I got to learn some more about Clear Lake, man. I need to go out there. Oliver wants me to come on his podcast out there, and I would name it, but it slips my mind at the moment. But yeah, I've got a couple dudes out there. Chuck Reagan's out there. He's a rock star dude. Does music for a living, and he's like a fishing guide too. And yeah, check out Chuck. He's got some great music. He's out in Northern California. I've been consulting with him for a while. He's got a 1 acre pond on his property. And so I'd love to get over and check out Chuck's pond, and I'd love to get over and fish Clear Lake for certain. Check it out, see what's going on in Northern California. I just don't have any experience in Western lakes whatsoever. But based on my conversations I've had with Oliver and other biologists from around the way out there, they're running into similar problems. They're seeing the same stuff. And even in trout populations out there, they've gotten some jacklegs are moving smallmouth bass around, throwing them in rivers they're not supposed to be. And that's not good. That's going to be displacing trout populations. Again, you can only have so many predators. So when you move smallies into the river, you're going to directly impact the trout. And then you're in a situation kind of like we're in here, where you've got a additional non-native predator that nobody's keeping. Oh, catch and release it. You know, no, it shouldn't even be there to begin with. It'd be better to throw it on the bank, let the coons eat it, than it would be to put it back in the water. But you just not getting. There's just so many guys that are so hell bent on that ideology that they're just not keeping them. And even the trout, the biologist I was talking to in Oregon, I was sitting next to a lady, just ironically enough, coming back from out there when I was out in Idaho. She was 25 years at the Oregon DNR or whatever they call it, and had the same problems. The trout thin, high numbers, skinny trout, nobody harvests them. And then you had competition from smallmouths coming in places that they normally never existed. And so that was making the trout even worse. So, yeah, you're right about that, Dexter, for certain. You catch those out there, Josh? Stripers are fun, man. Me and my buddy Bart go out there go to Lanier about once a year. We got a guide we take out there. He's got a nice big center console. You know, it's comfortable to fish, and big 300 horsepower. We run all over the lake. Striper are crazy, man. They'll be like right here in 1 minute and like 40 miles away 20 minutes later. They cruise that whole place. It's ridiculous. So we ended up. He's got a big 300 horsepower on the back of that thing. So we ended up, burning God knows how much gas running all over Lake Lanier looking for them. And you see them on the graph. You drop down, see if they're chewing, and eventually we'll find them. And they work together. There's groups of guides that work together out there, and hey, they're over here, hey, they're over there, whatever. But still, you end up doing a hell of a lot of running all over that lake. You can run from Buford to Gainesville, which is like 30 miles by car. It's a narrow, windy lake. It's almost like a bunch of creek fingers that go everywhere. Lanier's a weird place, but they flooded a valley. But there's good striper fishing in there. Solid striper fishing in there. It's fun, I like the diversity of it. And they need them. You always hear the bass fishing complaining, oh, if they didn't have the stripers, the bass would be bigger. And it's like, not necessarily. There's enough open water, even though it's got a lot of fingers and stuff. Big open water will skew, the advantage towards, well, we've got blueback herring in there now, which used to never be in there. Somebody brought those and threw them in there. And fortunately, they didn't ruin the place. They did ruin the white bass population in there, but they didn't ruin anything else. The spotted bass sure took to them. There's really big spotted bass in Lanier because of the bluebacks. I can remember Lanier before the blueback herring got in there, and it was just dinks, just 1 pound. It was either a 1 pound spot or a 6 pound spot, and nothing in between. And now it's kind of changed. So the bluebacks go pretty good with the spots in that particular lake. I also know that particular lake has a massive amount of natural mortality on the bass population. I think like 80% of the spotted bass don't make it to at the end of their first year. I used to know the biologist that worked out there for years, Reggie Weaver. I go talk to Reggie all the time, and he did a mark recapture study on the spotted bass and determined something. He didn't know what. Nobody paid for that study, but a huge amount of death in the spotted bass population. So only 20% of all the spots born into Lake Lanier make it to year 2. And yet it's still a world-class spotted bass fishery. So that'll give you an idea of how much mortality bass can sustain and still do just fine. Dexter is saying that the aqueduct has a 15-inch 2-fish limit, and that stripers are good for the aqueduct. I'm gonna have to look up what that even is, bro. I don't know what that is. I assume it's like a river. Like, is it a man-made thing? Largemouth. I'm assuming we're still talking about Santee Cooper, yeah. And also flathead catfish at Santee Cooper are massive beasts in there too. And when you start getting huge predators like that that control the bass population for you, it'd be like northern pike, If you noticed like up where Frank's at, um, they have pretty healthy bass. Those bigger bass are chunks, man. And I think it's because they probably get bigger than the average size northern can eat, and then they do pretty well. But at the same time, if you've got a bunch of, I don't know how much they weigh, but they're long, skinny fish about to your elbow, northern pike, that's going to be waylaying 4 to 12 inch bass, just smacking them around. So you're not, again, you've got another natural predator controlling the bass population for you. So you should see, a reduced bass population because of that predation, and then the bass that are left will be pretty healthy. But then we can take the same population dynamics and apply it to the pike. Do you have an overabundance of northerns? Then they're going to be smaller. You're going to be catching small northerns pretty much all day long, and occasionally a huge one that can eat those small northerns. Or do you have big northerns, where the northerns are just beasts, right? Well, they're going to be in lower numbers per acre. So you're not going to go catch them, like you're going to in the other lakes where you catch the small northerns. You're going to catch a lot more numbers in a lake like that at a lot smaller sizes. It's the same thing, right? It's just different species of fish. Oh, it's the reason LA gets water. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. I vaguely remember that. I'll check that out. I'll look at that. I don't know. That's interesting. Um, Again, though, I wouldn't if there's ocean run striper in there, and I would imagine the limit's low because the predation on them's high. There's got to be a reason. They're not just making up numbers. Be a couple of weeks, man. I came through. I had to pass through. I was helping my dad out, so I was up there about a week ago. But I was just really busy with some other stuff, so I couldn't get over there to you. But next trip up, I'll definitely get over there. We got to do some content. I've been slack on that, but um, I've just had some stuff going on, and it's been taking up a little more time than I usually have. A little more time, I guess. But I'll definitely get over there, Alex, and we'll get some content for your pond too. I know you've been working hard on it, and it's a great. It's another 2.5 acre system, so it gives us great content, to see the difference between the two. And by this fall, because we'll be at the end of the third growing season on Sugar Hill. So that's when you really start seeing things firing up. And then also on Sugar Hill, we will be adding it. I'll be getting away. I just wanted to prove to people that the bluegill only, there's red ear in there as well, but they're so few in number that it's irrelevant. You only stock like 50 per acre. So they're a decent little pop of forage in the spring, and something a little bit different for the bass, but not critical. Not if you didn't have them, it's not changing the growth rates. It would change the amount of sores on the fish, but um, the snail population increases the the parasites on the fish without the red ear in there. But they are a decent a little bit of forage, extra forage for the bass. But I just wanted people to see that a single fish or two fish, we'll say forage base, primarily bluegill on feed, grows bass just fine in ponds, you know. But Clint's main goal is to grow the biggest bass possible. So that's what we're going to be doing. And at this point where our average size fish is 3 pounds, I'm going to add rainbows in the spring or in the fall, and that'll leave the feeder running, and we'll grow up some nice trout in there. It'll give the kids that are fishing there an opportunity to catch something different. Clint's really generous with letting people fish in there. And so the cold weather, the trout the colder it gets, the more they like it, basically. They won't be inactive due to cold weather like the warm water fish. They'll be very active. And then come next spring, when the water warms back up, the rainbows, it'll kill them. There's not enough deep, cold water to keep the rainbow trout alive all year. So it depends on how fast it gets warm in the spring. But it doesn't just like kill them like a light switch. They'll have this period of where the water's warming and they're getting like all woozy, kind of drunk acting, because what's happening is they're suffocating. The oxygen levels are dropping as the water warms up. The oxygen levels are coming down, and that makes the trout lethargic. And that's, ironically enough, about the time the female bass are coming off bed, right around the bedding spawning time. And we've got enough big fish in there now that they can handle eating, because those trout will get pretty big. It depends on how much you feed them. I mean, we would have 8-inch trout go in the fall and have like 2-pound trout coming, seeing them around in the spring. They can get really big in there. So we'll have a massive amount of large forage for our, going on 4-year-old bass to consume in the form of trout, where any of the bass born this year or last year aren't going to be big enough to consume. So there's a limited number of large fish with a large amount of large available forage. And then the other thing I'll probably do in there is add gizzard shad too. I've done it a few times, and Clint says he's cool with it. And you can run into some problems with gizzard shad, but again, we got so many big fish in there that I'm really not concerned about them taking that over. And it is only 2.5 acres, so if they do cause me any kind of problems, I can just get Garrett to shock them, and we can either shock them out or net them out. 2.5 acres is easy to manage, and usually gizzard shad really don't get that big in smaller bodies. They'll usually get about perfect 8-inch size, but they get big quick. They get 8 inches in a year. So what I do is I put them in around February, and I'll go get big ones. They'll use them for bait for the stripers over at Lanier at Hammond's. So I'll go to Hammond's and I'll tell those dudes, hey man, I need I tell your dudes to bring the big gizads, bring me the big shad, the ones that you can't even sell for bait. Those are the ones that I want. I'll take as many as you can bring me. And in there, you don't even need very many, but you get 50 or 100 gizzard shad, put them in there in February and let them pop that spawn off. I think like one large female gizzard shad, I think, lays like 180 or 280,000 eggs. It's ridiculous. They just boom. And you can grow gizzard shad in the tank in the back of the toilet. They're very hardy. So we are going to significantly change the population dynamics at Sugar Hill. And then that will create the best trophy bass fishery I can create in 2.5 acres of water. Phil, what's up? Good to see you in here, my man. Phil knows all the tricks to fishing the trout behind Lake Lanier. Oh yeah, that's marketing stuff, man. I think probably what you're looking at now. I will say this, like the Titan bass dudes, and I can't think of the other hatchery. Well, there's American Sportfish. They've been doing F1s forever. They're called tiger bass there, I think, American Sportfish. And now you've got the Lone Star thing. All these guys are jacking around with genetics, but at the end of the day, it's just F1s. I don't think there's much difference there. And they grow good. I mean, as long as you put them in a decent rates, stock them at decent rates. But it's getting to the point now where Dr. Evil's Bass Laboratory is basically creating GMO type bass. It's it's crazy what these guys are doing. What I find funny though is, like, do you see anybody holding up any world records? Nah, because they're doing catch and release. Yeah, I don't know that much about it, Josh, honestly. I'll look into it, try to get some information, but genetics is always a secondary thing for me. I don't care what the genetics of the fish are. Give me some bass out of a ditch. Just let me stock them at the proper rate and let me get the forage base set for them, and I'll grow big bass. I don't care what their genetics are. Now, like I said, the F1s, yeah, absolutely, they're rock stars. And then you want to take F1s and you want to do some even more genetic stuff to them. Sure, it's great. I'll take them. They'll grow. But if you don't do it right, I don't care about the genetics. It won't matter. If you've got twice as many fish than the lake can support, they're going to stunt. Their genetics won't matter. Even you can have magic fairy dust genetics that will guarantee you 20 pounders. You got to still have the proper density. They got to be in the right situation or they won't grow. Dude, that was cool, man. I want to get on. I want to check that out. What river is that on? Huh. I wonder, are those striper running in from the ocean into the aqueduct, Dexter? That would make sense if they're ocean run. They wouldn't care. I mean, you couldn't harvest enough of them probably to make any difference at all. They're just going to keep pouring in. I wouldn't think they'd be. I mean, LA is close enough to the ocean that you're going to get just like here, Lord knows there's bull sharks. And I mean, you can just go to Salt Springs, which is just 20 minutes. Well, 20 minutes by the truck. It's all dirt road through the forest. It's probably only 6 miles from here. But you can see blue crabs. I'm freaking hour. It's an hour and some change to Jacksonville over there before you hit the actual ocean, and there's blue crabs right behind me. So that'll tell you how far inland these saltwater, things can come. You can go out to Palaca on the weekends. There'll be dudes cast netting shrimp, in Palaca, Florida, an hour away from the coast, and there's plenty of shrimp. So it's a completely different environment than it's really unique to the world. The St. Johns River is a very, very unique place. Bass on steroids. It's up in Toccoa. Oh, I see. I know zero about the migratory patterns of smallies. I would imagine they're going to behave very similar to spots. I've got to get a more comfortable office chair. This one's cached. Nope. I would think that I would definitely think about spotted bass type situations. They're going to pack up, they're going to feed, they're going to be pack feeders. They're not going to behave like lips, like largemouths at all. They're going to be different. So Dexter's saying they're mostly landlocked because of the gates and the water gets too warm south of San Francisco. Okay. Interesting. Are they stocking them? I wonder if they're stocking them. See, there's a lot to learn, man. I got a lot to learn. Yeah, Dexter, it's cool down here, man. It is like, it's interesting. Like the St. John's starts, no, I think it runs for 300 miles, almost the whole length of Florida, but it runs north, right? It's one of those kind of rivers. It's also one of the slowest moving rivers in the world, I believe. It really pretty much looks like a big lake. You don't see much current in it. But even down here, an hour from the coast, the dudes, it'll be tidally impacted. You know, like the fish will feed kind of with the tides. It'll be tide. They'll have a tidal impact. And I think I touched on a video. I went over to, my sister came down to St. Augustine. I went over and visited her, and I was keeping my eye on the tide chart because she had a place on the intercoastal. So I went back there and caught a couple small redfish when the tide was coming in. That was cool. Watch the tides. If high tide is like at noon, from like 11 to 1, it's pretty much dead. Usually, like most places, it'll be like a 2-hour window right around high. And then once the water starts to move again, that's when you want to be fishing. So that 2 to like probably 5, 5:30, maybe even 6, depending on where you are, because it's kind of weird how the tides work. It's odd, but and then when it goes to dead low at 6, that hour before, an hour after dead low, take a break, go get some beers, something to eat, whatever. When the water's slack in the ocean, you can't catch them in gill nets. They ain't moving, they ain't doing nothing. But when the water starts to move, that's when it fires them up. Yeah, I just learned that gill net fishing at the coast. We had a couple jobs I had for years that I'd have to run gill nets. It's the worst work I've ever done. My God almighty. Long nets and trash cans that you just let out the front of the boat, and they capture everything that gets in them. You want to talk about a pain? Get a blue crab out of a gill net without getting your fingers pinched like pliers. They're just in that thing like it's like the worst backlash you've ever seen with a blue crab in the middle of it. Terrible. I hated that crap. But I did learn a lot about catching fish at the coast and fishing the tides. That's important. You think they migrated up from Blue Ridge to get away from the spots? Yeah. It's interesting they found some habitat, that the spotted bass don't take over. Oh, yeah, for sure, Phil. They don't stock them, Dex? I don't know. They're sneaking in there somehow, aren't they? Be something to look up. More information. Yeah, that was sunny. Like we used to go fish Okeechobee. That was like east of Athens a little bit, I believe. East, I think so. About a 10,000 acre reservoir. And I was in a bass club and learning how much I hated tournament bass fishing in my early 20s. But you'd go over there to pre-fish it on a Friday. And just to clarify, I got nothing against bass tournaments. They're pretty fun. It's just like, it's like that old George Carlin joke. He's got nothing against golf. It's just the guys you have to hang around with, the a-holes you have to hang around with. It makes it such a crappy sport. It's kind of how I felt about that. It was like dudes being arguments about like on holes on public lakes. Like you fished with a dude. I had a problem with a guy one time. It was like I went fishing with him. I was back of the boat fisherman, and he took me to a spot. We caught some fish that day. Like 6 months later, I draw a different partner. Because every month you fish somebody different. So I'm back of the boating with a different dude. And we're driving around the same lake. We're, at the same lake. It was at Lake Russell. And I was like, I've been here before. And my partner was like, really? I said, yeah, when we fished here earlier in the year, turn right, and go back through there. And he's like, you can't go back through there. I'm like, yeah, you can. Stay to the right and go back there. And we did. And of course, the dude was back there who took me back there. And man, he got so mad at me for doing that, which, like, I never thought that, I had never tournament bass fished before. So I showed like somebody not in his clique the hole, and then that got around to the whole club, so everybody knew where the hole was. And the dude was like literally ready to fight about it. Like, he was so mad at me. And it's like, I quit. I just quit the club completely. I was just like, I'm done, just done. But anyway, going back to the Oconee point, we would go over to Oconee there because it was really close by for tournaments. And on a Friday, usually the tournament would be on Saturday, so you do your pre-fishing on Friday. Well, you pre-fished on Friday, and say they turn the power. They generate for power on that dam, and they opened up the dam and turned the turbines, and the water started flowing current, and basically Oconee turns into a river when they're doing that. You can literally see the current around the pilings and stuff. The fish just turn on like that. But then you go back the next day on Saturday, and it's a weekend, so there's people in the river, and they don't generate for power on the weekends, or at least they didn't back then. So they never turn the turbines on that day, and usually it was a big skunk on Saturdays, because what you were doing on Friday when they were running for power is not the same pattern that they're going to be on Saturday, and it never was. And Oconee was a tough place to fish that way. Yeah, that is weird, isn't it? I think water depth has something to do with it. I know that's why we can keep them in Lanier. Um, Lanier is a big, deep sucker. I mean, like 200 feet deep at the dam. And the thermocline is about 45, 50 feet deep. And on big reservoirs too, like usually the thermocline in a pond is you can kind of draw a line on where the oxygen level stops in a pond. So you take like a 2.5 acre pond, and we've got 10 feet of water, maybe 12 at the deepest spot out there. You're probably going to, if it probably won't even stratify in there because of the wind and wave action. But even if it did stratify, it would probably be about 8-10 feet, So you could dig that 2.5 acre pond out to 1,000 feet deep. You're still only going to have oxygen down to about 10 feet or so, right? Because that's how small ponds work. The depth is relatively unimportant because of the light penetration, especially when you get like a fertilization program going and you got plankton density in there. That shrinks up the thermocline like that, right? So you'll be changing the depth at which the oxygen level can exist in a pond by increasing the plankton density. I've seen that many times. But that thermocline is kind of the line. You put an oxygen meter in and drop it down, and it will just go to zero under the thermocline if the pond is stratified. There just won't be any oxygen down there. Where Lake Lanier is like way different. The dynamics are different in bigger lakes. So there'll be oxygen levels deep enough down to probably like 100 feet deep where the striper will roll down in there. But you have to understand that it's a deep lake and it's a clear lake. Like I said, 45 feet of visibility, way down. Like you see the Secchi disc way down. So it's like a big 28,000 acres of vodka out there, super clear, which gives it more light penetration, right? So what's going to happen over time as Atlanta develops and sediment comes in and more people's dogs crap and runoff and all that, as the lake gets greener and the plankton density increases, yes, it does increase the fish population because you've increased the plankton density. But what it also does is it shrinks that thermocline up into a warmer and warmer and warmer. And we're starting to see right now where as the thermocline rises, the striper don't have the cold water they need anymore to survive. So that's when you'll see the state transition over to hybrids, or wipers, we call them, a cross between a white bass and a striped bass, because they can handle the warmer water. There's also another interesting thing that happens on that deep water lake. Like, all right, so we got a thermocline, right? And what creates the thermocline is you have a warm water layer riding over on a cold water layer all summer. What keeps the layers separate is temperature, right? And that's what a turnover is. When the top cools off and matches the bottom, the water mixes, and that's a turnover. But if you think about it like a cake, like you've got a chocolate layer and a vanilla layer, right? So the chocolate top layer would have oxygen, but that vanilla bottom layer wouldn't have any oxygen. But the interesting thing, I was talking to the biologist at Lanier, the new guy, I think his name's Hunter. So there's a density change, right? Like this water density is different than this. This water is more dense than this water, right? It creates a false bottom at the thermocline. So when the plankton dies, it falls to the bottom of the lake. But in Lanier, it gets caught on the thermocline. So there's a layer in the worst part of the year in August of trillions and trillions of dead plankton that are rotting in the water right there. And it goes back to where we started, like talking about Clear Lake, where you've got things rotting in the water. It creates an oxygen depletion. So normally that deeper, colder water would have high oxygen, but on that thermocline layer for about 5 feet, the oxygen goes to almost zero right there. And actually you'll find the striper get underneath that layer. There's actually more oxygen under it because of that rotting phytoplankton bloom that's being trapped on the thermocline by that density change. I never knew that about a lake. I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, Josh, they get uptight in those clubs. I gave up tournament bass fishing a long time ago. I don't like my fishing to be competitive. I like to relax when I fish. If I catch some, I catch some. If I don't, I don't. Whatever. Yeah, that's exactly right, Phil. It's getting as shallow as 30 feet now. Oh yeah, that's not good for the striper. You'll know when the when the striper are fixing to be, no more, because they'll start putting hybrids in there to control the bluebacks out in open water. When they start shifting the stocking strategy to hybrids, the lake's getting too warm. Yeah, Hunter. He's cool. Very informative dude. That's cool, Josh. Anyways, hour and 38. I've got the same 6 usual suspects in here. I appreciate you boys. I'm getting a little sleepy. Been Yeah, I know, right, Dexter? I was kind of amazed on that one. Interesting how that works, and interesting how the differences between ponds and big lakes too. There's something that you just don't see. Like I said, in a pond, you can just draw a line, and it's easy to find the thermocline in a pond if it's stratified at all. It's just the oxygen will drop right out. You'll be like, good 6-7 parts per million. Good, 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 good. Most warm water fish need about 4 parts per million oxygen to stay alive. You're good. You're good. As long as it's over 4, you're good. And then all of a sudden, boom, 0, and you just mark it on the wire. Like where it went, and it's like, okay, the thermocline's at 12 feet in this pond because the oxygen fell out. But it's way more complex in the bigger lakes. Yeah, well, I think Phil, they had the other issue too, where gill maggots killed the crap out of the bigger striper. And I don't know if you were on here when I was talking about it. They stock 1,000,000 striper to get 5,000 to survive to adults every year. That's the ratio. And yeah, they had some kind of gill maggot problem that really smacked the I didn't think you were. Um, yeah, they had some kind of gill maggot problem that smacked the big stripers out of the lake. Because I mean, you can catch some really nice ones. I mean, there was like what 40, 50, 60 pounders, Phil. Um, I know this. I've hooked a few of them. Like they flooded woods basically, and all the woods that they're still like standing timber in a lot of areas of Lake Lanier. It's 50 feet under the surface of the water, but there's forests down there. There's still houses down there. But you would hook, you'd be fishing for striper, catching them, and once they get to 20 pounds, they get pretty fun. They're really strong. But then sometimes you just hook something that's like hooking the warrant, like it's just like hooking the back of a truck. You ain't stopping it. It takes you right into the trees and just busts you off. There was huge striper in the lake back in the day. And yeah, I agree with you, Phil. I don't know about that. They'll never get rid of the gill maggots, dude. That'll always be a cyclic problem for God knows what reason, probably eutrophication, but who knows? Yeah. Thanks, Dexter. Appreciate you, man. Yeah. It wasn't Hunter that told me that. It was Reggie Weaver that told me that back in the day. They stock 1,000,000 to get 5,000 to survive because they're stocking them this big, they get smoked. Which just goes to show you these guys who catch or are stocking their ponds, like, oh, I'm gonna put some tiger bass or some Lone Star bass in my pond. And they're stocking them 2 inches long. Those things are dead before the stocking. They're eaten before the stocking truck leaves the driveway. They get eaten. Like there's a disconnect there. I think it's like what 4,000 eggs for every pound of female bass. So, a 4-pound female bass can lay like 16,000 eggs. Well, obviously 16,000 bass don't survive in a pond, they're eaten. They're just all smoked. So guys who aren't stocking advanced fish are just wasting their money, stop trying to do genetics with fish this big. You're just take that money and light it on fire. Doesn't work that way. Anyway, I appreciate you boys, and I'll be back in about a week. So, get any questions or anything ready, and work on finding out about the aqueduct and talk a little more educated about Western. I'll ask Oliver some questions. Phil's got one more thing coming through. Oh, there's no point. There used to be great trout fishing in the lake, dude. My grandfather back in the late 60s, before they did the striper, used to go to the lake and sit under the 53 bridge in his John boat and just whack 18 and 20-inch trout. I mean, just whack them. That's gone, as soon as the striper came in. Every once in a while, you'll see somebody pull a trout that wandered out of the rivers from up there, from down from Helen, but it's not like it used to be, man. My grandfather used to go up there specifically to trout fish in the late 60s and early 70s before he passed away. And that fishery's done, man. There's nothing, that ain't happening. That ain't doing nothing. But all right, boys, I'm getting tired. I'm going to get some sleep, and I appreciate you. We'll see you next week.